Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm very excited to be joined today by Erica Quigley, who is the founder and managing director of Pokeyoke. How are you doing today, Erica?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. I was looking forward to having you on with me. Just to kick things off, I want to thank our sponsor, True Diligence. If you're looking for lower costs on your background checks and to save time and money with somebody that has 29 years of expertise, please be sure and click that link below. So it was fun talking with you offline, and I was looking forward to this show. Today, we're going to be talking about keys to creating workplace unity and efficiency. So as you know, I have an industrial engineering degree with years of work in process efficiency and cost reduction work. When I read about your work, it definitely struck a chord. So I know that executives in our audience are going to want to stay tuned to what we're talking about today. To kick off our discussion, can you tell us a little bit about where you were, who you were surrounded with that inspired you to do what you do today?
Yeah, definitely. I kind of got into this industry, into this work on accident because I went to college to be a designer, a fashion designer. But the thing that I was most interested in and drawn to in fashion design was you had to create this like computer aided design, the structural pattern of the clothing. And that was the thing that I was most drawn to. So then, what happens after college? You don't get a job in your industry. My first job out of college, I was working in customer service, and it was at a manufacturing company. The product was highly customizable, but there was no procedures to follow. So it was one of those places where you come in and they're like, you sink or you swim, and that's our culture. That's how we know you belong here or not.
Right.
And being my first real job, and given my personality in that I always thought that there was processes and procedures for things, I didn't really understand how that didn't exist. But I took the opportunity to learn everything I could about their product, about the manufacturing they did, about the customers they served, and I put procedures into place. And that was when I realized, like, oh, this is something I like to do. Like, this is like, I came here because I thought maybe I would like to be a customer service person and help the customer. But what I really like to do was put procedures into place. So after that, I went and I worked at Boeing for a little bit. I ran into similar situations there where procedures needed to be put into place. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to focus on this. So my next few places that I worked, I specifically worked at setting up operations departments, setting up processes and procedures so that the companies could scale. And then in 2018, I decided my next step was to start my company focusing on exactly that.
Awesome. Man, it is so important to have great processes in place and procedures in order to be able to scale things up efficiently. So I'm totally on board with that. I've been fortunate to work in 9 different countries on operations setups and streamlining, and it's been a blast, honestly. In terms of creating workplace unity and efficiency, what are 2 or 3 key things that executives should know?
Sure. So the basics is that all companies should be leveraging 3 pillars for their operations: people, process, and systems. But it's really how those things are set up and the communication avenues, like between the people and the process and between the people and the systems, that is what really allows a company to scale efficiently and profitably. Because without the communication, then everything's in its own silo. So I feel strongly that communication, whether it's through a system, whether it's the owner or the general manager of the company, communicating what's going on to the employees, like that is super, super important for any change management project, but especially when you're changing the core operations of a company and you want the culture to come along with it. So the other thing, when I was thinking about this a little bit before the episode, I was thinking, processes, they all have an input and an output. It doesn't matter if your process is streamlined or not. There's inputs and there's outputs. Some processes might have lots of outputs, but the inputs and the outputs are what creates the flow. So the easiest way to find what needs to be fixed or tweaked or could be streamlined in your business is to see what inputs and outputs lead to dead ends, like dead ends that aren't, finishing or delivering to a customer. And that's where you need to start looking at, okay, maybe I need to connect this piece of information to another part of the process.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. I remember doing a lot of process mapping, and wait times was such a big deal. Wait, and there's definitely things you can look at and streamline, no doubt. So what would you say? Can you give us an example, like of a client project and the kinds of results they were able to achieve?
Yeah. So one of our clients, we've been working with them a little over 2 years. They're based out of New Jersey. Their name's All Chemical Transport. And like their name suggests, they transport liquids. So when we started working together with them in early 2020, their processes for orders and dispatching, it was mostly a paper and a phone call process. Like the order would come in, even if it came over email, the order would come in, it would either be written down or it would be printed off. It would be placed in a folder for the day that it was supposed to be transported. And then the day before, for that file folder for that day, was taken out of the cabinet, and the dispatcher would go through all of the orders and enter them into their system, their ERP system at that point, and then assign them to drivers. So as you can imagine, the main issue was it was difficult for the company to plan ahead and to ensure that the team was all on the same page as to, like, what if there was more papers in that folder than they had drivers for that day? You don't really know until the day before, even if you had been getting orders in for weeks ahead of that day,
Right.
So it was almost like they were working behind, since the orders didn't get entered into the system until the day before they were due. So we worked with the general manager to streamline that process and getting it to a place where the orders were entered as they were received. And then the information from the orders was then be able to be referenced for planning loads and availabilities of drivers and of the tractor trailers. So I mentioned that this was when we started to work with them a little over 2 years ago. I brought this up with the general manager there recently, because I was like, do you remember that this is what it was like when we started working together? Because now the amount of changes and efficiencies has been remarkable. They're working through automatic electronic notifications to their customers when deliveries are being delivered. It's based off of geofences. They've gotten everything from paper to mostly digital while growing substantially at the same time. So it's pretty cool to be a part of some sort of like massive transformation like that,
Right. Absolutely. Yep. Been there and seen the amazing things that can happen when you do transform. Change is difficult, but if you're, streamlining things and making life easier, I've found that the people on the floor, if you will, they love it. They're just like, oh man, I was so hoping we could fix some of these things. So it's so fun to hear that. So on the flip side, what would you say are 2 or 3 key pitfalls to avoid when you're working to improve efficiency and have better workplace unity?
Well, you kind of just touched on one of them, where it's like the people aren't necessarily along for the ride, right? Where they're like, oh, I don't really know if I want to do this. So I think probably the people listening have heard of the change curve, and how, you're like, yay, we're going to revamp our process. And then we start to do it, and everybody at the company is like, no, this is awful. Why don't we just go back to the way things are? So we've definitely seen situations where people get to this part of the curve. I think the difference is, when we're working with clients, we know this part's coming, right? We're like, we know it gets worse before it gets better. But the people in the company don't always realize that. And so I think some of the pitfalls are, when it begins to get uncomfortable, some businesses don't feel enough power or perseverance to just power through that. And that's where communication, where putting together roles and responsibilities for the people, for team members, is super important. Because if you can't push through that dip in the change curve, you never get to the other side, you just whoop, right back up the mountain to where you were at before.
Right where you were. Yep.
Yeah. So I would say that was my number one pitfall.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's going to be, change is something that is just not comfortable. I mean, that's just the way we are as human beings. So one of the things I found was helpful was just communicating with the team that we were working with throughout that process, knowing change is happening, and hopefully you can get on board with it, because we got to change to make things better. I mean, that's just all there is to it. You can't expect different results doing the exact same thing over and over again. So what are the best ways for people to reach you, Erica?
My website is pokiokasolutions.com, and my name is like a nod to Six Sigma culture, where Pokioka means error proofing. So it's POKAYOKE solutions.com. And on LinkedIn, the URL is like in-Erica Q. I'm Erica Quigley on LinkedIn.
Very nice. And I know that's a Japanese expression, right?
Yep.
And I've heard it pronounced a couple of different ways. I did the Americanized version of it.
I know. I agree. I don't feel like there is, which way to pronounce it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. And what would you say as a final word of advice for our friends out there listening or watching today?
So one thing I've had to realize as part of my context of helping businesses transform is that you don't have to settle for living in reality. So this is a fun one, right? In order to achieve massive transformation, you have to believe that massive transformation is possible. So if your company likes to set goals based on predictable growth rate, predictable patterns, it's hard to see a massive transformation happening, because that's not what you've trained yourself to believe up to that point. So my advice is believe anything is possible. Don't settle for living in reality. That's my advice.
Yeah, no doubt. Absolutely. Great words of advice there. No doubt about it. Well, I really appreciate you coming on with me today, Erica. That was great content. I know that executives will get a lot of value from that. So thanks for coming on with me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. That's going to do it for our show today, everybody. Take care, and we'll see you again soon.